Alrighty, had just a little bit of technical difficulties going on here. Second stream ever. Woohoo, way to go. Hello everyone and welcome to Bjorn Paints. Today we're going to talk about Norse gods today. I'm trying to get some music going here, but it's being difficult. Here we go. Now I did have, I was trying to play some like Wardruna and stuff through my iTunes, but the window capture stuff that it was recommended on tutorials and stuff, for some reason wasn't playing the music through the stream, so then I had to embed this like hour-long file of just generic Viking music that I have, so that's what we're going to use for today, which is better than the no music that I didn't have yesterday. Let me know if I'm speaking too quietly or if the music's too loud, for sure. And let's get started. We just got the 2 viewers. I don't know if anybody else is going to be able to make it. At Timzuko says it's really nice though, and all the volumes sound good. So hey, Macy's is here. Hey Macy's, good to see ya on our stream today. Nice. Yeah, I figure we'll just give it a couple minutes, see if anybody else shows up. If not, then I will go ahead with discussing the different Norse gods. I have a series of drawings that I've made that for this idea called Norse Mythology, the animated series, because I feel like that's what the world needs, is these historical like legends being presented in a very accessible way. Hey, Wonder Boy's here. Hey, good to see you. Yeah, so I've done a lot of character designs based upon my knowledge of the lore, and we'll start showing you some of those. And this last time it was mentioned that it was hard to see my cursor on the screen, so this time I have kind of a display box here where I'll be able to actually like be able to circle and draw things as I explain them, just to kind of, I think that'll help with that issue. All right, so it's been like 10 minutes since or 5 minutes since stream started, 10 minutes overall, so I think that's probably enough time. And so let's see here. Let's start with, here we go. Okay, So since we're talking about the Norse gods, of course we have to start with Odin. Uh, um, the Allfather. This is the king of the gods. You can see here that I've kind of put in a lot of his main symbols and things that are associated with him. In modern, like Norwegian and such, people say Odin, but in Old Norse, back in the Viking Age, they would have been pronounced Othin, with that th turning into a d in later grammatical iterations. Then ends up being used mostly in English as Odin. I prefer the older. I think Odin is a very pretty name, and he was even kind of characterized in Proto-Germanic as Wodenas, in Old English as Woden, Wotan, and then in Old German as Woden. So we have Hugin and Munin here. Odin's ravens means thought and memory. Hugin meaning thought, and Munin meaning memory. So I have Hugin flying around like wandering thoughts. And then I have Munin on the shoulder, keeping Odin company. Hey, Viv Wolf, nice to see you. Yeah, so and then also we have Odin's wolves here. Odin has two wolves, known as Geri and Freki. Yeah, so that's how you pronounce. I'm guessing you're talking about Hugin and Munin. Yeah, that's how you say their names. And they fly around all of Mythgarth and report back to Odin on his high seat everything that they see. So he's kept up to date and is knowledgeable about everything going on in the world. Quite often, you'll just be hanging out in the woods in the north, and you'll notice that ravens always seem to show up in pairs and kind of watch what you're doing. And Odin being a god who is preparing for war, for Ragnarok. There's a kenning for battle itself called setting the table for ravens, because ravens were a big part of the culture, and of course they feast off of the dead there. Odin is so strongly associated with deciding who lives and who dies in battles that one of his kennings is known as the Valfather, father of those slain in battle, which is the same root where we get Valkyrie or Valkyria. And so what a kenning is that it's a reference to a greater canon of knowledge. So what we know about the Norse gods, we know first because of their interactions in the stories themselves, in the original sources and in the mythology, but then also when they are named, a lot of times what the Vikings like to do, instead of just saying what a thing is, they would poetically make a reference to something else that everybody already knew about, so they could then, it's like encoding names, like say for instance, like if they're going to be talking about gold, like I found a bunch of gold, the Norse would say, I found the tears of Freyja, because it said that Freyja sheds tears of gold while her lover Other is off wandering the world. So That's what a kenning is. And so Odin himself has like 142 kennings. It's giving all kinds of descriptions and stuff that allows me to kind of formulate this image. He's known as the Greybeard, as the Longbeard, you know, the Valdfather, father of the slain, the and also people know him as the Aldfather because he's the father of he's the patron and king and father of the family of gods known as the Asir. And there's two families of gods, the Asir and the Vanir. And the we'll kind of go more into the different families as they come along. I've arranged this kind of talk about which gods I'm going to show based upon who is worshipped the most, and then their family connections as they come up. So I'll do like Odin, and then his close family connections, and then we'll do like another person who's worshipped quite a bit, and their close family connections, and so on. If you have any questions about anything, I'm always free to answer. You might be kind of familiar with Odin because of the Marvel movies, where you know him as the father of Thor. But his portrayal in those movies is kind of like a benevolent father, when in reality Odin is a much more morally ambiguous character. He's known as the liar and the traitor. People who not all. So Wonder Boy has a question about Old Norse, wondering if all D's are pronounced as THs. Not all. Like in Heimdall, there's as a D that's an actual D, and not pronounced as a TH. And we'll go over, and there's different runes for those different sounds. You might have noticed that the one that translates into D in later languages, you might have seen, is kind of this weird D with a kind of a curly thing over the top of it, and that's to denote a soft TH sound. But you know, for sure, there's both that existed in Old Norse, but the Norse over time like to kind of like combine things and narrow things down. And so, like the original Elder Futhark had a lot more runes, but then they started combining runes for the same sounds and that kind of stuff. Yeah, no, great question. Thank you. So Odin's character is quite morally ambiguous. He's kind of the god you can expect to always where the ends justify the means. His primary concern is about Ragnarok, or the end of the world, and so he will backstab anyone, kill all the greatest heroes, and lie and cheat in order to gain the Einherjar, or who are the glorious dead who will join him in Valhalla, commonly in English known as Valhalla. And in Valhalla, you know, the dead are chosen on the battlefield by the Valkyria, or the Valkyries, and so they go down and choose the dead for Odin, who feasts in this great golden hall. So he's very strongly associated with the color of gold. Gold is precious metal itself. It's said that he has an eagled helmet, which is often interpreted as these long, like wings on the side of his helmet. The helmet here is based off of the Sutton Ho helmet, which is from the Vendel period, because they found that the eyes depicted in this helmet with this kind of the Spenglehelm were made of garnet, and one of them had silver foil behind the garnet which made it shine, and the other ones didn't, so they believed that this was actually a ritualistic kind of mask to roleplay as Odin while you were fighting, kind of as a way. So with Odin, you would usually he took human sacrifices, mostly on the battlefield. If you threw a spear over the battlefield, you could dedicate everyone died there as sacrifice in honor of Odin. So with war being problematic, Odin's pretty problematic. Um, so yeah, and yeah, so the that's kind of based off that. The Sentinel helmet seems really cool. There's a popular documentary about the finding of that helmet itself, and maybe try to find some videos to see if you can kind of pick up on the shininess of the garnet across the eyebrows. But yeah, I tried to make everything as historically accurate as possible in my renditions of the gods here. So Odin has his great steed Sleipnir. Um, um, and Sleipnir is his eight-legged horse that allows him that flies over the world or over land, over sea, and is the fastest of all horses. Um, Now, the Scandinavians had horses known as Norwegian fjord horses, who were preserved in Iceland since Iceland is so isolated from the rest of the world. In Norway and Denmark, they crossbred with other horses as more horses were brought up into their culture and such. But during the Viking Age, they would have just had Norwegian fjord horses. And we know what those are because of Iceland, and it's actually illegal to crossbreed with Icelandic fjord horses because they're trying to preserve that species or that unique ancient bloodline of horse. So I've Sleipnir depicted here as in that proper fjord horses, who are actually much smaller, shorter than a lot of horses nowadays. Yeah, Atem went to Iceland and saw the horses in person, which would be pretty great, and yeah, I just imagine these big burly Vikings riding on these little pony-like horses, and it also reminds me of how the voices of the Norse tend to be very soft-spoken. They like to braid their hair. They cared a lot about their appearances. It's very different than this kind of like hardened macho biker culture that is now often depicted as Viking culture, supposedly. Yeah, Atom's pointing out that my camera is slightly out of sync with my mic. And I would love to have a message on how to fix the low latency problems. I am pretty new to OBS, and it is, and I'm trying to provide a good experience. Okay, just enjoy the music here for a second as I try to fix this issue. And having to try to translate things a little bit because I do work on a Macintosh computer. Let's see here. I know that I've seen that before. Where is it? Why? Oh, I swear everything changes all the time. Maybe we can just kind of hope that this can fix itself, because I can't seem to quite get the right section to change the latency. And I don't want to spend forever on this. Yeah. Okay, let's get back to our discussion here. So we're talking about the fjord horses, and then we also have the head of Mimir. So in the story of when the Aesir and the Vanir went to war with each other, after the battle they had a peace and exchanged hostages. And in this exchange, Odin gave them Mimir and Honir. And I actually have an image of Honir here. So that's Mimir. And then we have Honir, who's actually recorded as the brother of Odin. In a different story, it's known as Vili, and then their other brother is Ve. Thank you, Flame. I appreciate you complimenting my voice. Just keep it nice and hydrated here. So this is kind of, then Honir is not especially intelligent, but he's very, very handsome. And it's said that, yeah, Duke's laying down. He's a good boy. Got a guest appearance by Duke. And so yeah, there's so Honir is brother of Odin, and he's not especially smart. And when the Vanir found out about this, they felt cheated because Mimir was actually the most intelligent one, and so they cut off his head and sent it back to the Aesir. And Odin took the head and preserved it with herbs, and then brought it back to life. Odin is very apt in magic. He has the ability to unlock locks, to put out fires, and to bring back and talk to the dead, which is kind of the beginning of the Voluspa, which is the beginning of the Poetic Edda, is him bringing a Cirrus back to life. I guess Duke doesn't want to hang out on camera anymore, so he's just going to the other room. Yeah. And Odin is known for wandering far and wide, wearing a gray tunic and a cloak in the Norse color Blar. Gotcham says he found my shields too uncomfortable. That is probably true, even though it is just a foam shield back there. My wooden shields are off screen. But yeah. So this is kind of what Odin looks like when he's wandering around on Mythgard, the land of the humans. He's said of wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and you also notice that he's carrying a large drinking horn. He's known as having the mead of poetry, which was made when from the blood of a god named Kisavir. Dwarves killed him and used his blood to make mead, and it was actually during this peace agreement that all the gods, the Asir and Vanir, spat into a pot, and that's what this Kisavir was born from. But then some dwarves kidnapped him and turned him into mead. He was the most intelligent of the gods, and with the best poetry, and drinking the mead from him would imbue that intelligence and great poetic ability on you. And it said that Odin, now after he stole the mead, it gives it to people, and that's where inspiration comes from. But when he was stealing it, he had to shapeshift into a great eagle, and he was being chased, and he had to oil slick his way to escape, where he shat out a bit of the mead, and so that's where bad poetry comes from. So you can see that he values intelligence above everything else, and he works with magic. There actually isn't a distinction in Old Norse between words for general intelligence, wisdom, or magical knowledge. It's all the same. And so Odin kind of embodies all of those. He has cunning, he has magical knowledge, and generalized wisdom, and artistic ability. His name, Odin, actually means the master of Othar, and Othar is the divine inspiration, like in a classical sense, where the gods give you inspiration. You can go into an altered state of consciousness, or also known as ecstasy or fury. It can be a inspiration on the battlefield, it can be poetic, it can be artistic. So Odin's also the god of artists as well as warriors. There's actually a big trope in the Norse culture about the poetic warrior, where a lot of the great heroes recite poems as they go out on their adventures. Yes. So yeah. So that's Odin. That's kind of a general synopsis on Odin. Lastly, you should know that he only drinks the mead of inspiration. That's the only thing he ever consumes. So he doesn't actually eat food. Instead, he gives his food to his wolves, Geri and Freki. And it's said that Odin will be devoured by the great wolf Fenrir at Ragnarok, but he doesn't seem to hate all wolves, probably because the wolf Fenrir is actually a Jotun in wolf form and not an actual wolf. Norse culture being very community-minded, tended to relate themselves to wolves a lot. So yeah, that's Odin. So we'll move on from Odin to his wife Frigg. Lothar, it's good to see you. I try to say hi to everybody as you show up. I do appreciate you stopping by and joining us on this lecture about each Norse god. Feel free to ask any questions that you may have. We do like to try to get an engagement high here, even though I'll just kind of be rambling on as we go. So Frigg, being the wife of Odin, so Wonderboy asks if he says that he reads somewhere that the gods eat magic apples to keep their youth, and if there's any truth to that. And actually that is true. There's the goddess Ithun, who grows the golden apples that preserves the god's youthfulness. And since Odin doesn't consume anything but the meat of poetry, he's usually seen as being pretty old, though it's not sure that the gods ever die of old age. He just is old. And Frigg is often, his wife is depicted as older, to differentiate her from Freya, and to, because she's more of like a maternal or like grandmother-like figure, usually called upon for help with marriage or in weddings or with starting families and such. And Frigg is a great seeress. She can see clear into the future, but she never tells anybody what she sees. And she's also she lives in a swamp, which I've depicted as a background here, Fenseller, and I've depicted this her in the attire of a volva, known as the Volver, plural-wise, which are the witches, or seeresses in Old Norse culture here. And Frigg is known for having a falcon feather cloak that allows her to shapeshift into a bird and fly. And so I have the falcon feathers depicted here, and the distaff, which is the staff for weaving flax or wool into threads, and it is known as a magical tool or a magical staff that all witches used. Possibly the idea, because there's a depiction of Frigg riding on this distaff in a very old church. It might actually be like right out of the Viking Age, like 1200 AD, and this might actually be the idea where witches ride on brooms comes from. Is this idea of actually the woman's general tool being spinning wool and using as opposed to using a broom back in those days. So this is kind of your witch god there, and that's now. Next, we're going to talk about the greatest hero of the Norse gods, Thor. And in the Marvel comics, they say that Frigg is Thor's mother, but she's actually not. Odin has a lot of lovers and has a lot of children with a lot of different people, and Thor's mother is actually Jorther. Jorther being the earth itself, the embodiment of the earth or spirit of the earth itself, being this great giantess known as Jorther, and that's Thor's mom. And he's often associated with the color red, as on days when it's going to be very stormy, because he's obviously associated with thunderstorms and lightning and so the sky will appear very red in the morning when there's going to be a big storm coming. Hello there. Reference to Rick and Morty, which is true. They did. Rick got pretty freaky with the whole planet once. So pulling modern mythology there. And so Thor is known. The thunderstorms and lightning are known as him battling and killing Jotnar, or the giants or trolls that are the enemies of the gods. And with the lightning and it says it's him throwing his hammer, and the thunder is the big crack when it kills the Jotnar, and his chariot is pulled by two goats, whose names mean Gnasher and Biter, Tengrisnir and I actually have the name. Tengrisnir. Tingris? Okay. Anyway, reading my own runes. Looks like I just replicated, but so his hammer Mjolnir, everybody knows about. So Thor should have red hair, um, because he doesn't have a soul. No, I'm just kidding. Um, and his hammer has magical abilities, where they use it to bless weddings for fertility, or to even bring things back to life. In some of the stories, one of the emotions is that these goats are pretty tasty, because as Thor and Loki travel, they actually kill his goats here, and these are Icelandic goats that you see depicted here. And they eat them, and then they collect the bones and lay them out on the sheepskin, and then the next morning Thor can use Mjolnir and bring them back to life, which is pretty awesome, though it must be pretty traumatizing for the goats themselves. But yeah, they so those are his loyal companions, and so he's often associated. Some kennings for Thor are, the tall forehead. He's also known as the bear. You see here some other important things is you should know that Thor is kind of the god of your everyday person. As Odin is the god of kings and kind of the elite upper class, Thor is the god of thralls, who are slaves in Norse culture, and of carls, who are the lower class working people. And to embody this in the saga of Harberslóth, which is the saga of Harbard, or Harberth. Odin's in disguise and using the name Harberth as a ferryman, and Thor wants to cross the river to get back to Asgard, and Odin starts this insult battle with Thor, and eventually Thor figures out who it is, and you can see how much they hate each other, even though they're father and son, just because Odin thinks Thor is so beneath him, being so poor that he doesn't even have a proper pair of pants. And I actually really Lothar brings up the recently revealed Thor from the God of War Ragnarok, and I really liked Thor's design. Most people are kind of freaking out over him being fat, but actually we have lots of stories where Thor just kind of gorges himself all the time. He's known as a great eater, when I told you the story on the last time about how when Mjolnir was stolen, he had to cross-dress as Freyja and go try to get married to a Jotun to try to get the Mjolnir back. And in the story, he eats 3 whole oxen and 6 whole salmon and drinks 3 barrels of ale. And doing that, it's not a surprise you're going to be larger. Also, if you look at the world's strongest men, they also have to have these very thick torsos to be able to support weight and lift heavy things, which is a lot of those strong men come from Iceland themselves, because there's an old tradition of picking up these big round stones on holidays and seeing how far you can carry it as a game. And so I think reminiscent of Thor, and his strength, and so I really like the depiction of Thor that's been revealed there, even though I did have some problems with his shoulder armor because they didn't have leather armor in the Viking Age, and I did have some other problems with the first God of War game in general, mostly because they turned the lore on its head and side with the Jotnar, even though they're the bad guys. It kind of makes sense for the context of the franchise, where Kratos is killing all the gods and kind of being on the opposite side of mythology. But it was kind of hard to watch as a Norse pagan myself. See the gods depicted as being selfish bad guys, and continuing on to my overall depiction here, you see I've doubled up with the belt. That's not very common in Old Norse. I did that because of the Thor is said to have a belt that increases his strength, which helps him wield Mjolnir, and he also has these iron gauntlets of strength that also increase his strength, and are fireproof. In the One Saga, he actually has to reach in and hold a hot iron, and he's able to do so because of his gauntlets. And so I've designed these based upon some Varangian Guard gauntlets from a later time period, but are still related to Norse culture. And what is very interesting is that you don't get iron gauntlets, even though he's described as having iron gauntlets till later in history, and you don't really have warhammers show up until later in history. But here you see Thor depicted as fighting with this iconic hammer. So I don't know really what to make of that. We know the stories come from a time period before the Warhammer, the high Middle Ages. We know they come well before that time. So that's kind of interesting, that Thor actually has two things that are kind of anachronistic and odd that way. And then lastly, I've depicted Thor with a piece of whetstone sticking out of his head here. I did this because in one of the stories, Thor battles a giant, and he throws his hammer, and the giant throws a giant whetstone at Thor, and Mjolnir, bursts through the giant piece of whetstone, which is and a piece gets stuck in his forehead. And there's a superstition in Norse culture that you're not supposed to throw a whetstone, because if you do, it'll pull on that bit of whetstone in Thor's head and it'll make him angry. But if you're looking for a more benevolent god father figure for mankind, it would be Thor, who's the protector of mankind, wanders Midgarth all the time, and protecting us from the Jotnar. And he's actually literally a father, and he's kind of the god who's seen to. He's not as intelligent, obviously, as Odin, but he cares more about doing the right thing in the present moment, kind of like your lower class people are prone to do. Killing, your friends is wrong, and so Thor will never do that. Odin will, if it benefits him in the long term, which you can also see as the conflict of personalities between the two. So I have Thor depicted as kind of lower class here for those reasons. Thor is married to Sif, who had her hair cut off by Loki once, and so Loki had to was threatened under death if he didn't fix it. So Loki petitioned the dwarves to make a new set of hair for her, made out of actual metal gold. So that's kind of her symbol here, is that golden hair. And in this process, we also get Mjolnir and Gungnir. Gungnir being Odin's spear, which he can throw in battle. It'll never miss a target, and it'll always come back to him. So I did forget to mention the spear earlier. But yeah, so you have the shiny golden hair, and then we have a rowan tree in the background, because we actually find that in the cross-culture between the Sami, the indigenous people of Scandinavia, and the Norse, that they actually took Thor as a god into their own pantheon, and Sif as well, and in their connections, Sif is symbolized by the rowan tree. So I put that in there as kind of an allusion to that cultural exchange. Um, yeah, and Sif has a son named Uller, and this is Thor's stepson, so he's not a son of Thor. Um, and Uller is a god of hunting, um, particularly winter hunting, where he goes out on skis. He's depicted with skis, and which keep you above the snow, and he has a bow and arrow, obviously, because bows and arrows actually weren't used for war, they were primarily used for hunting. And it's even said that when Odin disappears for a long time, one time on his excursions to Mythgarth, that Uller actually takes up the throne and rules over Asgarth. I'm assuming there's a reason why Thor can't, or maybe Thor doesn't want to, because he's, wandering the worlds and killing Jotnar, or maybe because he was fostered by Jotnar. He's considered like Jotnar, and that he can't even cross the Rainbow Bridge without it being on fire and hurting him. The Bifrost. Yeah, I can turn the music down a little bit. Thank you, Tim. There we go. And so we have Uller here, depicted in winter clothing. And then we can move on to, so we've kind of covered some very large gods already. So the rest of this will probably go by a bit faster until we get to some more gods that we know more about. And then we have then we actually have Thor himself has some kids. He has Modi, who kind of all of Thor's kids have different variations of the word strength. Yeah, Wonder Boy mentions American Gods, which I think is a great show and a great book by Neil Gaiman, and he depicts Mr. Wednesday as Odin, because in American culture, the biggest remnant that we have of Odin is actually in the name Wednesday, because in Old Norse or in Old English he was called Wotan, Wotan's Day. Yeah, and so hi Kirk, welcome to the stream. Glad you could make it. So yeah, this is Modi, who I've kind of depicted as wearing a bear fur and having like a copperish beard, mixing the gold of Sif hair and the red of Thor's hair. Good. I'm very honored to actually have fans in my of my Norse knowledge here. Yeah, so this is the Modi, and then you have Magni, is Thor's other son. And Atom says that Odin, like the representation of Wednesday in American Gods, is actually rather ruthless and conniving, which is very true to character. So yeah, no, I think that's accurate. I think Neil Gaiman did a lot of good research in finding his portrayal of Wednesday as a con man. Odin certainly is. Wandering in disguises and always trying to get things from people and stuff. It's essentially what a con man is. It was a great book that I read back in the day, and yeah, it said that after Ragnarok, or the end of the gods, that Magni and Modi will inherit Mjolnir from Thor. so that even though Thor dies, Thor kills the great world serpent Jormungandr, but dies of the poison from the serpent after only 9 steps. And so you have a new generation of gods to help protect the human race, which, you know, is a great story about the cyclical nature of everything, really. In one story, Magni actually is given a horse after Thor kills the giant who owns the horse. He's the one that threw the whetstone. He was invading the Hall of the Gods, and after Thor kills him, he takes his horse Goldfaxi, which means golden mane, and he gives it to his son Magni, and this really irritates Odin, because Odin thinks that he's much more deserving of this gift, being the father and everything. And but Thor doesn't back down and gives it to his son instead, kind of showing their relationship there. And then lastly, we have Thruther, who is Thor's daughter, also meaning strength, and embodying Thor's strength itself. And I love Thruther, being a very strong female character. There's actually a story of a dwarf, Dvergr, who's trying to propose to her and has to ask permission from Thor in order to do so. And you know, Thor thinks that this dwarf is just horribly ugly and not worth his daughter's time, and so he tends to do the interrogation, the regular like father interrogation of suitors, you know, and he does it for so long the sun comes up and it turns the dwarf to stone, which is where, you know, Tolkien got the idea for the trolls, and with the hobbits and in the Lord of the Rings series, that were in the Hobbit, where Bilbo buys for time until the trolls turn to stone. Comes from this story. So yeah, I think that's really fun. So the Modi, Magni, and Thruther are kind of lesser known gods, but they are part of Thor's family, so I thought I'd show them here. Next up, we're going to talk about the Vanir. I guess I should have given a content warning. So content warning. There is some depictions that are accurate of adult parts that are very intricated into the characters of the fertility gods, but yeah, so if that bothers you, that's your fair warning. But yeah, okay. So this is Freyr, who's one of the main gods of the Vanir, the other family of gods, and these are more like fertility gods, the gods of farmers. There's stories where a priestess would take a statue of Freyr and put on a cart and would drive around the fields as a blessing to try to increase the fertility of the land, the agriculture. I have his name here as Yngvi Freyr. Yngvi, which we have here, is known as another name for Freyr, which is actually the beginning of the line of the Ynglings, or the ruling family of Sweden. So this is supposed to be the progenitor of that royal family in Sweden. And when Sif gets her golden hair, Loki also has the dwarves make challenges the dwarves to make things that are even better. A second set of dwarves as a contest, and then as a result they get Gulabursti, which is the golden bristle boar. But yeah, Atom points out that the royals saying they're born from gods. It's quite a very common theme that you see throughout the Middle Ages, the Viking Age, and even going clear back into ancient Egypt, with that kind of almost divine right to rule coming into place. But the thing is that all of mankind is kind of descended from God, so really you're not that special. But yeah, so we have and this boar is pulls Freyr's chariot. It can also run through the air on top of water and is incredibly fast. And then Freyr's also, Loki gives him the gift of his ship, Skith Blanir. And Skith Blaithnir, yeah. And the ship itself is said to be made from wood that is so thin that you could actually fold it, and the wood is so flexible that it won't break, so that you can actually fold the ship down and fit it into your pocket, which is a really cool idea. And so he has his ship depicted here as well. So those are very kind of associated with the ocean as well. Kind of the fertility cycle. And Freyr used to have a sword that was enchanted so that it would actually just float in the air and fight for itself and just defend him. But he had to give that sword up as dowry when he saw Gerther, Freyr just sat on Odin's throne one day and looked out from the high seat over all the world, and he saw the most beautiful Jotuness that he'd ever seen in his life, and I just fell madly in love with her. So we know that Freyr's very much romantic, and he could not live without her. He had this love sickness, and so he sent his servant to go ask for her hand in marriage, and as payment he gives his servant that sword to protect him as he goes through Jotunheim. The Wonder Boy asks if Loki's ship was made from fingernails, and that's true. Actually, that's Loki's ship. So this is Freyr's ship, which was made by dwarves in that contest. Loki's ship is during Ragnarok, where the long fingernails of the dead from Hell are put together into a ship that Loki rides on. But no, that's a good question, and we'll definitely talk more about that as we get to Loki and Hell and such. But yeah, and since Freyr gives up his sword, he ends up having to fight a duel later and wins with an antler instead. So that's kind of his fighting weapon of choice, I guess. And again, very much a fertility symbol, very symbolic of those sorts of things. And yeah, so that's basically Freyr there, depicted in kind of the Swedish style of Viking clothing. Oh, it's good to. Sorry, you have to go, Kirk. Yeah, I'm glad you're here. Yeah, no, I wish you could stay as well. I will have the VOD up, and we'll be posting that on YouTube as well. But yeah, good luck at work, and thank you for stopping by. I definitely really appreciate the viewer count. It means a lot. Yeah, so that's it for. So this is my depiction of Gerther, who's the beautiful Jotuness that Freyr falls in love with, and she ends up marrying him after a lot of resistance. And married women in Norse culture tended to actually cover their hair with headscarves or caps. So kind of a traditional thing. So you don't see like the witches are kind of wild and tend to not wear covering up their hair, which brings me to Froya. This is the twin sister of Freyr. Back when the Vanir just ruled themselves, they were brother sister, but they were also lovers, which was the Vonic tradition. But when the Vanir lost to the Asir were very much against incest, and so they had to find new partners. And so Freyr found Gerther, and Froya is said to be married to Other. And we've mentioned Other being that ecstasy or that inspiration. So this could be a metaphor for magic in general, but it's more likely that Other is just another kenning for Othin, which means the master of Other, or that inspiration, because her husband is also said to travel far and wide and disappear for a long time as he's traveling through Mythgarth. And when he's gone, she cries tears of pure gold, which we have depicted here. And she also rides on the golden boar that was made by the dwarves. There's depictions of her. The same motif that had Frigg riding on the distaff had a depiction of Freya riding on the golden boar, and her chariot is pulled by cats. So we have Norwegian house cats. So it's so Atama wonders if the marriage to Odin is true or speculation. It's speculation because they don't right out say Odin; they say Othur, which is missing the last part, the in Odin. But it seems almost pretty obvious that she was or is one of the lovers of Odin. But she is the lover of many people. She's Freya is kind of a goddess of sexuality and beauty itself, and so there's some theories with that Frigg and Freya were once considered the same goddess, but we know that's not true in the Viking Age because of the saga of Lokasenna, depicting them, or where Loki talks to them individually in the same setting. So we know that they're seen as two separate goddesses by that point, even though she is also a witch with magical powers, wields a distaff, and has a falcon feather cloak, just like Frigg does. So obviously there's a lot of close similarities between the two. But instead of, I think, with Freya being from the Vanir, and Frigg being part of the Asir, and having children such as her Frigg's children being like Balder, the great shining hero of the Asir. I think it would be confusing to have Balder in the Norse mindset to be half Asir, half Vanir. But I have an interesting variation depicted here on the distaff that Freya wields here. I turned it into a spear as well, because one of Freya's kennings or nicknames is the same name as one of the Valkyries listed, Odin's Valkyries, and it said that she fights with the spear. So it's actually possible Freya is said to actually get half of all the dead who are chosen by the Valkyria, or the Valkyries, into her own hall of Folkvanger. And with half the dead, so only men can go to Valhall. It doesn't. There's no specifications for Folkvanger, and why she wants half the warriors. But she also might be has a role as a Valkyria herself. And the Valkyries are part of this pantheon of gods, also known as the Disir, or female ancestors, who are like the Norns and the Valkyria, and then of course your personal female ancestors who watch over your and kind of guide your familiar luck. And the Norns control fate, and the Valkyries control your fate after death. And one of the kennings for Freya is the Vanadis, or the Vanir Dis, female from the Disir. So there's a lot of linguistics that goes on. Okay, shh. Kirk is definitely not here. Yeah, and so Freya. There's a lot of like memes about Freya being of battle as a choosing the dead and having half the Einherjar go to her halls. Also of sex, with like Bringskamen, the necklace of beauty, giving her over, which is a necklace that's enchanted to make you always incredibly beautiful, irresistibly beautiful. And the story actually goes that she had to try to get this necklace from some dwarves, and there was 4 dwarves that made this necklace, and they would not accept any payment from her except for her body. So she actually has to sleep with each of them in turn in order to get to this necklace of beauty, which is certainly a thing. And her chariot is pulled by cats, and so I have a Norwegian forest cat that I drew here, and I looked into the actual root word when it mentions her chariot to see if it was like a lynx or like a big cat. But what it actually was a small cat, specifically the word for a house cat. So her chariot is pulled by house cats. They're so we know that the house cats are important and associated with Freya, who is also a witch goddess. So that's pretty fun. So Freyr for fertility. Freya has her own fertility aspects, and then we have their father, Njordr, who is the god of the sea. And Njordr, Wonderboy says house cats can be vicious and cuddly, which is very true. Sven, my Norwegian forest cat, is a great example of that. He can be quite vicious at times, and but also sweetheart. So you just never know what you're gonna get. And Njordr, we know that he was worshipped alongside with Freyr quite a bit. Though we have late period kind of prayers and appreciation for him for bountiful sea harvests, which is fertility of the oceans, and being able to fish and get to all your seafood. It was like in the 1500s, a woman praised Njordr because she caught so much fish that she had like a week's worth of food, which was very late after the Christianization, but he was still quite honored in Iceland still. And so I have him in some traditional kind of like fisherman's clothes from Scandinavia, with a traditional fishing spear, that was used by the Scandinavians, which has the three barbs on it. And the spear seemed appropriate as for like a ruler. It's kind of a symbol of somebody being in charge, and as the patron or father of the Vonic gods, it seemed appropriate. Yeah. And so Njordr is always, we know he's barefoot and always walking in the sea, because there's the story of when the gods had to kill a Jotun because he was trying to steal Ithun, and they tried to save her, so Thor killed him, and he had a daughter named Skadi. And Skadi, that Jotuness was looking for repayments from the gods, and so she asks for one of them to marry to add back to her family. It's kind of like gaining a family member for losing one. In Old Norse culture, your family was a single unit. Like if somebody killed your brother, you could kill their father and it'd be considered equal. Like there wasn't such a direct one for one as far as familial ties, as far as value and honor and that sort of stuff. So she is looking for a husband from the Asir, and they said that she can choose one, but only if she chooses them by their feet. And so she chooses the cleanest, most beautiful of feet, thinking it belongs to Baldur, the most beautiful, most charismatic of the gods. And it ends up belonging to Njordr, because he's always in the sea, and the sea's washing his feet. So he has the most beautiful feet. And so that was kind of the premise of their marriage. As other payment, Skadi also, because she was so sad about her father's death, she also wanted to laugh again. And so the story goes that Loki, who is a big reason why her father had to die, actually ends up being the one who makes her laugh. And so he ties a rope to the beard of a goat, and the other side of the rope to his parts. And there's a tug of war, and the ensuing image makes Skadi laugh. So that's how that's part of that. Skadi is known for loving the mountains and the snow, while Njordr's, of course, of the sea. And so their marriage actually ends up falling apart because Skadi just hates the sea so much that she can't stand it, and she ends up moving back into the mountains where she came from. Okay. I can say testicles. It's hard because I'm like a new streamer. I'm not against swearing, but you know, people. I mean, I have my stream tagged for mature audiences because I don't want kids and stuff to get on more of the PG-13 stories here. But you know, so there should be no kids in my chat ever. And so I could just tell these stories more in depth using the actual words. So yeah, Loki ties the rope around his testicles and has a tug of war with a goat. Yeah, and so and Skadi is also depicted as it says that she's equipped with a bow and arrow, and then crosses the snow. So she also has skis, just like Njordr, or not Njordr, like Ullr. But it's also apparent from the tales that Skadi isn't just the stepmother of Freya and Freyr, or Freya and Freyr, but she's actually the actual mother of Freyr and Freya, at least according to the Heimskringla, which is a later telling where the gods are depicted as mortal rulers in Scandinavia instead. Though we do know that according to the Roman Titus, there was supposed to be a female goddess of the sea named Nerthus who would be the counterpart to Njordr, but we don't know what happened to her. So Njordr and Nurses being a brother-sister kind of pairing, like Freyr and Froya. So yeah, so there's Skadi. So you can see the gods marry a lot of Jotnar, even though they're enemies. They're also able to interbreed and they grow their families with them, and so they're basically like just different tribes of the same species, so to speak, of higher beings with greater powers and such is the best way to think about them. This is Balder, and he's the most charismatic shining god. A lot of people associate him as a later assertion, possibly the Norse pagan reinterpretation of Jesus himself, though I'm not entirely sold on that. I think, but he has this great story that we know predates the conversion to Christianity of his story, which begins Ragnarok, where he actually dies. So Balder is known as the Shining, the Bright One, and he has his great hall Breithablik, which no unclean thing can enter, no unclean person can enter. So he has a big thing for cleanliness, and he's supposed to be like the most like charming of the gods, incredibly wise. And on his funeral pyre, when he dies, Odin gives him the ring. Oh crap! What's it called? Dropnir. Because of it's supposed to be the most precious because it replicates itself every 9 days with 8 more rings. But yeah, I think. But the most important thing that Balder's known for is his story of when he dies, and that he actually comes back after Ragnarok to rule, and the new gods, the new generation of gods. And I think that is probably why people think of him as being associated with Jesus. If not, like maybe that aspect maybe wasn't part of the original pagan lore, but was put in later as kind of a conversion motif, which there are a lot in the sagas. But we don't know for sure. But we do know that there is like rune stones depicting the ride to hell after Balder dies, that come from the Viking Age itself. So we know that he has an older god that came from the pagan Vikings for sure. Still, even if he did take on aspects later, as the favorite son of the high god being related to Jesus. When Balder, it's interesting because Frigg was so worried about Balder being killed that she actually went to, and that's another example of an actual D in Old Norse instead of the soft TH, is in Balder. So Frigg goes around to everything within the world and makes a promise not to hurt him, which is a very almost kind of like animistic idea that everything has a soul and nature about it, and can change that if you can communicate with the soul of that thing. So like all metals, all like wood, just every piece of matter has a soul itself, that Frigg contacted and reasoned with and said, hey, don't hurt my son. And it made everything swear not to, and oaths are forever binding. And so the Norse, since he can't be hurt, the gods, to amuse themselves, would start throwing axes and spears at Balder, and they would just bounce off, like you do. And so obviously it's a smart thing to do, but Loki gets super, super jealous of all the attention that Baldur's getting. And comes up with a plan to show him once and for all, because he knows that when Frigg was asking everything to not hurt Baldur, that she skipped over the mistletoe, um, because the mistletoe is actually a parasite that attaches onto like evergreen trees, like pine trees, so they don't lose their leaves. So it's just a small little vine growing on these pine trees, and so she missed it. She couldn't see it, and so the mistletoe is actually still able to hurt Baldur. And so Loki creates a spear out of mistletoe and gives it to the blind god Hother, who is the brother of Baldur, and he has Hother throw the spear at Baldur to join in the fun, saying that he'll guide him, and it pierces Baldur and kills him, and that's how Baldur dies. And you might have heard of Hother before, the name before, because it was actually the inspiration for Hodor in the Game of Thrones for holding the door. But yeah, and so Loki, just out of jealousy, has Baldur killed. The first kind of like family slaying in the gods, and it's actually interesting because he makes, like, they say it's a spear specifically, the mistletoe, or an arrow, which it seems almost impossible because of how small mistletoe is. But they actually call it a mistletoe tree in the saga, the Icelandic saga, because they actually don't remember what mistletoe looks like. They thought it was a tree itself. So there's kind of some fun, like, context around that story for that. But I actually have a drawing of Hother that I did here. So that's kind of like an arrow made out of mistletoe, with its iconic white berries and such. And he's a blind god, and so Loki guides him. And after he dies, they send a messenger down to Hel to petition her to let Baldur come back to life. And Hel says that only that she'll agree to do this if everybody in all of the world mourns for the death of Baldur, if he was so loved that no living thing wouldn't mourn for him, or would everything mourns for him. And so Frigg goes to every living thing, and when they hear of Baldur's death, they mourn for him, except for one Jotnes named Thok. And she, in this cave, refused to cry and mourn for Baldur. And you find out why is because she was actually Loki in disguise. Loki shapeshifted into this female giant, or troll, female troll, to make sure that Baldur stayed dead. Which is not great, So I mean, there's multiple opportunities for Loki to not cause the end of the world, Ragnarok, or not to kill the most beloved son, but he does, because he's an asshole. And after Baldur dies, Odin has a son with a Jotun named Grith, which some people think is actually Gerther, instead of Grither, which is actually Freyr's wife, and but that's speculation, because there's an I and E difference in the names there. But they're both Jotunesses, and that son is Vali, and Vali, at the 1 day old, avenges Baldur, being a half sibling, and he kills Hother when he's only 1 day old. That's kind of his entire purpose, is to avenge Baldur, and then Hother it's forbidden for anybody to worship Hother because of this act of killing his brother. So no mortal man is allowed to worship him. Even though it was Loki's fault, Hother still did it, which kind of imparts the idea that actions, not just motivations, were highly important in the morals of Norse society. But it is, like Atom says, it's very sad. It's a tragedy for sure. And Balder has a great wife, Nanna, in the Heimskringla, where the gods are depicted as humans. Instead of Loki killing Balder, there's an alternate version of the story where Nanna is the person that Balder has a big crush on, but then Hother ends up trying to marry her instead, and so then they have a duel, and that's where Balder dies. Take that for what you will, but she's supposed to be incredibly beautiful, and whoever, just like Balder having a big crown, being the favorite son of Odin, this, if as far as Vikings go, Balder would be a prince of the gods, and so Nanna would be like his princess. So she has a classic headscarf covering because she's married, and has a crown as well. But yeah, and Nanna and Balder have a son named Forseti, and this is your god of justice, of laws, and he carries a golden axe, and there's this great story about him, people coming across him just while sailing one day. But yeah, the story, Atom asks where the story of Hother and Balder's duel comes from. That comes from the Heimskringla, which was Snorri's later stories about the mortal line of kings in Norway. And when he turns them into mortals, he writes down that version of a story instead of the mythic one with Loki and everything. And that Balder died because of this love triangle going on, which is, I don't know, obviously a creation of the post-conversion, but because that's the only evidence we have is from post-conversion, but the pre-conversion we actually have, we know the story is older than that as far as Balder dying and being an important part of Ragnarok. But and yeah, so Forseti, god of justice, son of Balder and Nanna, and after Forseti, you have Tur, and Tur is a god that you would call upon for winning duels, which also makes him god of justice kind of in a roundabout way, because duels were or holmgångs, as they're called, where you would, if you had to settle a dispute, you would fight to the death or to the first blood in a duel, and whoever the gods favored as being most correct would win that duel. And so that's Tur, and he's most known for not having a hand. And this happens because this is one of the only other stories that we have of Tur, is that Loki has a son, Fenrir, and Fenrir is a Jotun who's in the form of a wolf, and he starts just devouring everything in sight and growing massive and more massive and more massive, being incredibly greedy and just eating everything, and he's going to devour the whole world. So the gods have to bind him, and so they tell Tur, who is kind of like helping raise the wolf, that it's his responsibility to make sure that he doesn't grow too big. And so Tur creates this game, like, hey, let me bind you up with some ropes and see if you can get out of it, because you're so strong. And Fenrir agrees, and he breaks free of the ropes, and so Tur tries some chains, saying, hey, well, see if you're strong enough to break through these chains. And Fenrir's like, yeah, that's not a problem, so he breaks through the chains. And so Tur has to come up with a new plan, realizing that Fenrir is just too strong to be contained through conventional methods. So he goes to the dwarves, the great craftsmen, and commissions them to make some bindings for Fenrir. And the dwarves take the footfalls of a cat, the spittle of a bird, the root of the mountains, all these things that we don't have in the world now because they were used to create this ribbon that was unbreakable. And so Tur goes back to Fenrir with this game and says, hey, see if you can break through this ribbon. And of course, it's just a ribbon, so Fenrir is rather suspicious. And so he says, okay, but I need collateral so that I know I'll be let back out if I can't break through this, losing some of that confidence. And says, I need a god to put their hand in my mouth, and so if I don't get let go, I can bite it off. And so Tyr volunteers for this, and he puts his hand in Fenrir's mouth, and they bind him, and Fenrir wrestles and he tries to get free of the bonds, but he can't. So then he bites off Tyr's hand, and then they put a sword in Fenrir's mouth, and they lock him away down in the realm of Hell with his sister Hel. And with the sword in the mouth, he has these great rivers of saliva flowing forth and whatnot. But so this is Tyr, and he's not actually of the. He is a part of the Asir, the main family of gods, but he's not quite of their lineage. There's actually a story where him and Thor have to go retrieve a big cauldron because the gods want to have a big feast, and Tyr knows of a great cauldron with his father, and so they go to his father's house, and his father's this big old like three-headed giant, Jotun, and who stubbornly refuses to give them the cauldron. And so Thor, unless Thor is able to break his drinking cup. And when he says this, Tyr's mom, who's a Jotuness, says, it would be better served to hit the cup against the giant's head, because there's nothing harder than that. And so Thor does. He takes the cup and he smashes it against the giant's head and kills the giant. And so then Thor, being the only god strong enough to carry this giant cauldron, leaves with the cauldron and goes to Aegir's house, who is a giant who brews the mead for the gods and beer for the gods, and uses this cauldron, which then leads into a story known as Lokasena. But yeah, that's kind of all we know about Tyr, but we do know that he's obviously embodying the idea of self-sacrifice for the good of the community, with sacrificing his hand in order to protect the other gods from the monstrous wolf, the Jotun in wolf form. And then after Tyr, we have Heimdallr, and Heimdallr is he's the watchguard over the Bifrost Bridge, or the Rainbow Bridge to Asgarth, that bridges Midgard to Asgarth. And he has this great Gjallarhorn, which he will sound when Ragnarok happens. And when Jotuns show up, he warns the horns, and so, but he really blares his horn when Ragnarok happens, because all the Jotuns have arrived to do battle. So I've depicted him as kind of a sentry here, with some like Varangian guard kind of armor, giving him more kind of armored up than you usually would have in a Viking Age Norse kit. And some of the references to Heimdall actually refer to him as one of the Vanir. and he's considered amongst the Asir, but the family Asir kind of incorporates all the gods together in poetic verse and kennings. Only really family of the Vanir are ever called Vanir, and so it's interesting that he's referred to as part of the Vanir. So he actually probably was originally part of their family, and so I've kind of designed him similarly to the rest of the Vanir that I've designed. And yeah, I mean, he's known as as a white god. White is important in Norse culture because it's cleanliness. Considered a noble trait for the upper class. They would actually wash with a soap made from lye, and the lye would bleach their hair and bleach their clothes. And so when you could wash more because you had more time and you were less dirty, things would literally become more white. Your hair would become whiter, your clothes would get whiter, and this was considered better. More like Njordr's feet, they were clean, so they were the most beautiful. It's like cleanliness is the most attractive thing. So he's very clean, so I gave him all white robes, kind of like I did Balder. I'm getting that association. And interestingly, in the Volospa, the seer made the reference that like she knows where Odin gave his eye, because Odin gave his eye in order to for wisdom. He gave his eye into Mimir's well in order to gain wisdom, and then he hangs himself for 9 days on Yggdrasil, the world tree, and gets the runes and pulls them up with his spear, which in my depiction of Odin has the runes on the spear. In Volospa, the seer says that she knows where Heimdall hid his ear. So apparently Heimdall hid his ear in Yggdrasil, the world tree, I guess to be able to hear everything that's going on in the worlds, in the 9 worlds. And it's said that he's able to see from his vantage point. He's looking out from Asgard towards the rest of the worlds, and he can see even the grass growing in Mythgarth. So he's got these very powerful eyes, and only 1 ear, and he has golden teeth, which is interesting. They don't explain why he has golden teeth, but he has golden teeth. And Heimdall has 9 mothers. Interestingly enough, we do know that Aegir and Ran, his wife, who are Jotuns of the sea, Ran having the net of Ran being those riptides that pull people away into the water, and they show up like miles away from where they were, are said to be taken by Ran's net. And but Aegir and Ran have 9 daughters, who are the 9 like waves of the sea, and there's only 9 maidens we know together. So it's possible all 9 of those maidens are Heimdall's mother. So that would the association with the oceans and the Vanir also kind of ties into him being part of the Vanir, if those are his like 9 mothers. And then there's an interesting story that Heimdall has where he's actually, because he travels across Mythgarth as well, and he ends up, having physical relations with a lot of mankind. And there's a story of how the class system was established in Norse society during his travels, where he first stopped at the house of a family who were very dirty and covered with soot and dark hair, and they didn't laugh, and they could not provide any kind of good food at all. So this lack of hospitality. This was the house of Thrall, and Heimdall goes to bed with both the husband and wife, and as a result of this menage a trois, they have a child who's born named Thrall, and this is where the class of slaves comes from. And then the next day, Heimdall goes to a farmstead where you have kind of just your regular carls, people who are farmers and such, and they could give bread. Instead of just gruel, they could give breads, but they couldn't afford meats. So they could give some better food, provide some light stories, though they're not very knowledgeable. or very apt in poetry. Um, and so Heimdall has a decent time, and decides to sleep with both the husband and wife, and has this three-way with them. And the result of this is they have a son who they name Karl, which is the lower class, the Karls, the free people. And then you have um, the next day Heimdall goes to a big mead hall, and uh, there's a great king there, and the king can provide lots of meats and cheeses, and they provide entertainments for Heimdall, because they know great poetry and they have time to learn and be very knowledgeable about things, which is very entertaining to them. And so Heimdall has a great time with them, and they have light hair, and they're super super clean. And Heimdall decides to have a three-way with the husband and wife, and they end up having a son who they name Kungnir, or the king, because Heimdall had a great time. He blessed them with this continuing wealth, and it's kind of this myth that talks about the three classes and different kind of motifs that you tend to see in the classes of thralls, being eating poor food, and having dark hair from it being dirty, and those kinds of things. And from these families, you have all of the rest of mankind kind of spreads out. And so Heimdall is also known as a progenitor of mankind in general. Even though the very first man and woman, Ask and Embler, were supposed to be created by Odin, Vili and Ve, or Odin, Honir, and Lothar, depending on which story you're talking about. They carved some driftwood into the first humans, but in this one you have real society building. So Heimdall's known as like the father of mankind. The sons of Heimdall being kenning for mankind in general. So that's interesting. Then you have Bragi. This is the god of poetry. There's a great poet who went by the name of Bragi, but then there's supposed to be a god named Bragi, and we have him with a classic Viking Age lute here, and there's not a lot said except that he's very knowledgeable in poetry and music, and so this is kind of your god of music and such, and that he's married to Ithun, who's the goddess who tends the orchard and grows the golden apples that perpetuate the youth of the gods. And just like Froya, a lot of the stories revolve around the Jotnar trying to make Froya their wives, and Ithun gets captured in one story. Let's see, Wonder Boy asked if I've ever read any books by Rick Riordan. I've heard of Rick Riordan, but I have not read any of the books. But the name does sound familiar. Do they kind of talk about some of the gods in there, Wonder Boy? Well, we'll wait for her to answer. So yeah, this is Ithun, and okay, so the geared towards teenagers wrote all kinds of lore. Okay, I know that there's some fantasy books that are supposed to take place with a lot of the Norse. Okay, and he did Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Norse lore. Nice. No, I love all mythologies really. um, and as long as they do their research and can stay accurate towards what we do know, um, and then of course allow for some interpretations and some filling in of the blanks for sure. Um, yeah, and so then that'd be kind of fun to read. I do love good stories. Oh, he wrote Percy Jackson. I see. Um, I'm not sure about the Greek stuff and how I don't know how accurate that is, but um, if you got a lot of criticism for being inaccurate with Percy Jackson and the Greek gods, then I imagine he might have done more research with the other ones. Yeah. So Thun is considered very beautiful, like Freya, and very sought after. And of course, wherever she is, the apples follow. Then of course you have a lot of people's favorite Loki, the kind of a trickster. He's actually a Jotun who becomes blood brothers with Odin, though we don't know why. Loki being blood brothers with Odin with a blood oath, we know that Odin isn't allowed to drink any drink that isn't also presented to Loki as well. And this is mentioned in the Lokasena. And Loki is incredibly intelligent, so I'm sure there's a reason why Odin decided to keep him around. Probably another way to gain wisdom of sorts is by having Loki be around. Though ironically, Loki ends up being the travel companion of Thor quite often in the stories. So in Marvel, they make Loki and Thor out to be brothers as a reason why they're always around, but that's not such in the actual Norse mythology. They're not related at all. But possibly because Thor is always going through Jotunheim, so he needs a guide. Loki's always with him, and Loki, is characterized by, his selfish behavior. He's always getting with his selfish behavior, always getting in trouble, causing trouble for the gods, and then he has to get himself out of trouble, unless he gets punished by the gods for causing, or being killed by Thor for causing problems. But he comes across as a very flamboyant character, though he's not the only cross-dressing character. Odin also disguises himself as a witch, and often disguises himself as women in order to seduce men and heroes. So we know that Odin, cross-dresses and also sleeps with men as well. And Loki did turn himself, into a female giant when he refused to cry for Balder. Wonderboy asks if Loki switches genders entirely or just cross-dressing. So I think in general his dress is depicted as cross-dressing. So he's still called a he, but at certain times, like when the gods had their wall built and they almost lost Freya to the wall builder, Loki had to stop them from losing Freya by seducing the worker's horse, by turning himself into a female horse and seducing the horse away. And then Loki is actually the father, or actually Loki's the mother of Sleipnir, Odin's horse. So he actually switches genders entirely. So he's very gender fluid, um, which is gender is seen as incredibly fluid in Norse culture. A lot of your gender is your what you're presenting as. Um, if you had like a super low cut shirt, it was considered more feminine, and so you were known as an ergi. If you were the recipient in gay sex, you were considered ergi or more feminine. These behaviors made you literally more female, which was grounds for divorce, because if you're more female, then you have less masculinity, then you're were seen as being less fertile. Um, if you couldn't grow a beard, you were considered more feminine, and maybe lacked fertility. And so, but if you presented as a man, then you could be an active, if you were the what they call the active participant in gay sex. That's fine. You didn't become an ergi or become less manly. Though you have this mix of all the spectrum of man, ergi, which is like in the middle, and then you have female on the other side. So you had this kind of spectrum. And Odin himself was an ergi, and Thor calls him as such. And a lot of people think that the ergi were like hated, but they weren't. They just had a culture around preserving. If you chose to, you could be masculine, and you presented in masculine ways, and you had masculine things, which is very kind of like they had gender norms or normativity, but they didn't hate or look down upon anybody who was queer, like a lot of people do nowadays. A lot of that's projected onto the past and gives a lot of modern, like Norse pagans, kind of a wrong idea that they hated. I mean, ergi. If you were called an ergi, and you could lose honor or reputation, but they didn't hate ergi. So you could fight to prove that you weren't, in order to restore your honor. But they also allowed ergi to be around. Being an ergi wasn't grounds for being outlawed. They were just a different part of society, and they didn't fulfill the roles of your typical masculine roles. They were considered almost like a third gender. So that's kind of fun. And tying presentation and traditional gender roles like clothing and such to being so tied with actual gender or gender identity is something that we're still figuring out nowadays. But Loki isn't the only one. So it's sad when people kind of make him out to be the god of queers and such, because he's such a problematic character. In a lot of ways, he represents what you don't want in society, as far as his lying and his cheating and his selfishness and his getting people killed and causing Ragnarok and then siding with the enemy in Ragnarok. So this cautionary tale. I think a lot of the gods are archetypes of different kinds of people, like Odin being the ends justifies the means, Thor being the straight up in the moment moral kind of person, and Loki being the person who thrives off chaos and is always kind of just in it for themselves. When the dwarves end up having this duel, and all the great weapons are made for the gods and such, Loki loses this bet, and he's supposed to lose his head to these dwarves, but since he's one of the Asir, he's protected with the idea that he didn't promise that they could have his neck, only his head. So how are they supposed to have his head without damaging the neck? And Odin kind of enforces this technicality, and So what the dwarves do instead is they sew Loki's mouth shut, which you can see depicted here is where the dwarves actually sewed Loki's mouth shut temporarily. And after Loki has Balder killed, obviously he's on very thin ice, but he didn't do it himself, so they can't really punish him for it. But then Lokasena, he starts insulting, throwing like Holmgang worthy insults at each of the gods, and releasing all of their secrets in ways that they're not morally. He's basically calling out all the secrets and moral ambiguities of the gods. He slut shames all the female gods, calls them whores, says they're having extramarital affairs. I mean, just being a real kind of Wonder Boy. That is why Loki is thought of as being mostly beardless, is because of his cross-dressing nature. Yeah. And there's the stories of Njal saga. Njal couldn't grow a beard, so his manliness and fertility was always being brought up into question. So we know that it's a big part of Norse society in general. And so, so Loki can be a real asshole, and when he does this at the party, where all the gods are feasting with Aegir, the gods decided that it was time, enough was enough, and so they take him down to a cave, and they bind him with the entrails of one of his children, Narfi, and then Skadi, of all people, actually hangs a snake over his head, and with the fangs open so that the venom drips onto his forehead constantly, which is said where earthquakes come from, as Loki thrashes about in pain. But they're stopped when his wife, Sigyn, holds a bowl to catch that, but when the bowl fills up, she has to empty it out. Then we get earthquakes again through the thrashing about of Loki. And that's punishment for insulting the gods, and kind of a indirect punishment for Baldur's death, because this, from the story, happens after Baldur died, and Loki is bound until the actual events of Ragnarok, where there's the Fimbulwinter, or the winter with no summers, for 3 years, which start Ragnarok, and then you have the great war between the Jotnar and the gods, and involving Loki's monstrous children. So you have this very sad Sigyn. A lot of her endings involve her being very upset for being married to the Great Liar, which is a ending for Loki is the liar, and so. But Loki has extramarital affairs with Angrboda, who's a Jotuness, who's the bringer of misery, and her children are all monsters. They're Loki is a Jotun and she's a Jotun, so they have Jotun children, but for some reason they all take the form of these great monsters. And so you have Fenrir, who he's already mentioned the story of, being bound. He's a great big wolf. Wonder Boy mentioned that in one of the books, Loki escapes and they have to find him and challenge him to fighting to shrink him down to capture him in a chestnut prison. Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that before. I know Loki does shapeshift a lot. Obviously, he's very knowledgeable in magic. Turns himself into a salmon once, with the beginning of the Volsungs, and ends up, but he escapes as a salmon, not from this torture, but from the situation. And the gods are trying to find him, and they come across Otar, who is in the form of an otter, and they kill him and take his gold. Ah, Corin, welcome to the stream. Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing talking about the Norse gods. Yeah, I think eventually I'll start actually doing painting stuff, but right now people are demanding knowledge about Norse stuff, and I'm happy to share and kind of do both because I would like to talk about Norse stuff as I paint too. So kind of a Viking Bob Ross, as it were. But yeah, good to see you, and we're just finishing with the talking about the Asir, and we're kind of getting into the Jotnar now, with like Fenrir or Fenrisulf, who has the brood of Fenrir with Ingrabotha. So kind of a Oedipal kind of relationship there, creating broods of wolves, like Skati and Hol, who chase the sun and moon across the sky, who are their own soul. Is the goddess of the sun, and Mani being the god of the moon, and their sun and moon are pulled on chariots, and they're constantly being chased by these wolves who are going to catch them and eat them eventually during Ragnarok. All right, Wonder Boy, thank you for stopping by. It's great to see you. Have a nice dinner, for sure. It is getting that time for quite a few people. Yeah, and I'm almost done with my list here. A lot of more vague characters or characters we've already talked about, so I should be finishing up pretty soon. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Yeah, always appreciated. So Fenrir is known as the Great Wolf, and then you have Jormungandr, who is the Great Sea Serpent, who is so large that it encircles the entire ocean, all of Mythgarth, and can bite its own tail. And the name for Jormungandr means the great or giant monster, right? And he's also known as the Mythgarth Solmur, which means the Orm, or the worm, which is the name for a dragon or a serpent of Mythgarth. So he encircles all of Mythgarth, and is known as a sea serpent or worm. And this is who is supposed to kill Thor, another child of Loki, and with Ingrabotha, and spits out venom that is what ends up killing Thor, even though Thor manages to kill Jormungandr. With Fenrir, Fenrir eats Odin in Ragnarok, but when he does, Odin is avenged by one of his sons, whose name is Vithar, and Vithar, he has a giant boot that is made from the scraps of everybody who makes shoes. They leave the scraps as offerings, and it goes to Vithar, and so he can make this giant boot which is able to resist the jaws of Fenrir. And with this, he's able to, in Ragnarok, rip the jaws apart of Fenrir and kill the wolf, which is quite a potent image. And Vithar is only mentioned in with relation to Ragnarok. So you just know that he's a son of Odin, and is any kind of greater narrative is lost to us or is obscure. And the last child of Loki with Ingrabotha is Hel. And I didn't draw this one. Of course, I didn't draw the Fenrir, Jormungandr, Hell. I haven't gotten to those yet. I should mention that. Um, but this is a pretty close depiction of what Hell should look like. There's a realm of Hell, and then she's named after Hell. It says that she is half corpse black or blar, which is a dark corpse color in Old Norse culture, because you have blue and you have black. The black being svart, but then you have this color blar, which is dark magentas, dark blues, dark purples, kind of more like navy blue color, and these are the color the corpses turn after rotting for a bit. And so she's described as being half regular and half blar or half corpse colored, and most people interpret this as being half corpsey or dead because she is. She does have a great hall in Hell, where she does torture oathbreakers and people who steal spouses from other people, and these great punishments are for terrible people in Hell. Though Hell is where most people go when they die. All of mankind goes to Hell, and is generally a good place. It's just cold. Which is why your corpse turns cold after you die, is because it's so close to Niflheim, the land of ice. Yeah, so she has halls there where there's all sorts of like snakes and torture, and there's the roots of Yggdrasil down there, which is chewed on by the serpents that are down there, and Nithholk, the great dragon, who eats all those people who do things so bad that they're unforgivable. They get devoured by the dragon. And are lost forever, these oathbreakers, on the corpse shores. So yeah, this is Hell, and she raises the armies of the dead in Ragnarok in order to fight against the gods, and Loki rides on a boat made from, well, the dead cross over in a boat of fingernails, and Loki stirs up the hordes of Muspelheim, these fire giants, and so the whole world burns down during Ragnarok, and sinks into the sea, and then it comes back again, and everything regrows, and men and women survive by hiding within Yggdrasil itself, and they have to repopulate the whole earth. So that's interesting. We've mentioned Jotnar quite a bit. They're also known as Thurs, or trolls. Those are all Norse names, and this is kind of what your general Jotun looks like. There's what's known as trollish behavior. Is supposed to be trolls, where like trolls are, they have bad manners, they're dirty, they're hairy, and they're just pretty. They have. But they're obviously also shapeshifters. They're not always giant, but they're often depicted as at least larger than mankind is. We mentioned the Disir earlier, about who they were, as far as the female guardian spirits, which include the Nornir, or the Norns, who control all fate and weave all fate, because fate is inescapable in Norse mythology. Even if you know everything that's going to happen in your life, you are powerless to change any of it. And on the day of your birth, the day of your death is already declared by the Norns, and you will die on that day no matter what you do. And so there are usually three maidens sitting under Yggdrasil, weaving the fates of mankind in a tapestry. And their names literally translate to what has happened, what is happening right now, and then what should happen. See if I can pull up a note here about their names. Nords. Yeah, so Verthandi, what has happened, Urthur, which is what is happening, your fate itself, and then Skuld, which is what should happen. Skuld and should or actually linguistically very close. So that's kind of fun as far as that goes. And then the last of the Disir are the Norns. And actually, about Halloween time, there's a Norse holiday known as Winter Nights, where they make offerings to the Disir, and it's said that they ride around on horses. And the Valkyria, or Valkyries, as it's called in English, they they're part of the Disir who ride around and are choosers of the battlefield and all that. But there's one Valkyrie who's different from the rest, who's named specifically in the sagas, and her name is Ýr, E-I-R, Ýr, and she's a Valkyrie, and she actually chooses who doesn't die in battle. She's a healing deity to heal wounds and such, and they call upon her for healing. So she's kind of like, when we're getting to really kind of the lesser known goddesses and more obscure beings here. You have Gefjun, who's a goddess that exists in the story just to establish the founding of part of Denmark, the big island that goes between Sweden and Denmark, which she carves out with the assistance of 4 oxen, which I've depicted as musk ox here. And after the gods and Jotnar, as kind of your biggest beings in the mythology, you also have lesser beings. We mentioned dwarves before. You have alves or elves, dvergar or dwarves, and collectively trolls, dwarves, and elves are known as vetir or huldafolk, in Icelandic known as the hidden folk. Because they live in alongside us, but in a hidden realm, and they're spirits of nature and of the farmstead. And so your community would often worship like the gods, because gods, being kind of like kings in society, are too big and too important to care about individuals, right? And that's how they're seen as a function in Norse society. But your land spirits are definitely more closely tied to what's going on with you. So you often would leave offerings for protection or for health and to these Huldafolk. And it's even thought that a lot of illnesses are curses that are laid on people from upsetting the Huldafolk by not keeping their farms clean or not taking care of the land that they're supposed to be living on and that these beings represent. You have your Alfar, which are the light elves, and these are kind of big light elves. These live in Alfheim, which was given to Freyr as a teething gift when he was young. And when you start teething, you're set on a lap and given a name, and people give you gifts for this. You're seen as an actual person then. So the gift for Freyr was Alfheim, where the elves live, and the elves are these land spirits of the forest. But you also have the dwarves, who, like trolls, turn to stone in sunlight, and they live in the rocks and the hidden places. And the dwarves are great craftsmen. We've talked about quite a bit, or used quite a bit. And in the last stream, I talked about their origins, how they came up like maggots coming out of the corpse of Ymir, just manifesting themselves as like a byproduct of that. And then in more recent Scandinavian times, this corpus of elves and dwarves kind of combines together into what's known as the Tomta, or the Nissa. And these are little like gnomes. These are little dwarves who are spirits of your homestead, of your house. These are your house spirits in your general home. And these are kind of like usually talked about mostly around Yule or Christmas time. So that's kind of part of the corpus of the lower mythology with the elves and dwarves. Dwarves feature quite a bit in the myths, but elves not very often. And And then another big faction of sagas is the Draugr. And the Draugr are the living dead, or the walking dead. Um, if your corpse was just, if you died sitting up, it's possible that your will can make your corpse start walking around after you're dead. So they had all these burial practices to stop this from happening. These are a big feature of when the hero goes down into essentially the dungeons to recover treasure and stuff. It's protected by these Draugr. Um, yeah, zombies. I mean, they're just a big part of Norse lore. As a result of sometimes there's just bad people who become Draugr after they're dead because they were bad. There's people who just have a hard time resting, unfinished business, that kind of such, or aren't honored enough by their descendants, um, are doomed to wander as Draugr. And then there's even the sea Draugen, which are people lost at sea who wander around as the undead, and will come up on shore and cause havoc on the living, which is what Draugr always do, is cause trouble for the living. So, Halloween's coming up, and it's kind of spooky. But yeah, so that's the last of the kind of lower creatures I have for you today. We've gone a little bit over, about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I think we're going to call it a day there. Have a time for any questions, if anybody has any questions or clarifications about anything. But that covers the most important gods and Jotnar from the mythologies and who they are, and some context around them. So when we start talking about the stories, you can have a good clear image of who we're talking about. We've already talked about where things are and established that. So the next step is to just know the gods, and I hope I've done that today. Helped you know who's who and who's related to who, and of course the imagery associated and context around each of these gods. But yeah, thank you for coming to my stream. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. As they say in Norway, tusen takk og god helg, which, and 1,000 thank yous. I really appreciate you guys, and yeah, if we don't have any questions, I guess we'll call it there. Yep. Oh yeah, the music died, but yeah, thank you so much for coming out, and we'll have the VOD up soon, and yeah, and I hope we'll see you guys. I hope to do this weekly on Wednesdays, Odin's Day, or the day of Odin, wisdom, and to share this wisdom with you in honor of Odin. Have a good week, and we'll see you next week.